Hey guys, Kevin Downey from Kevin Downey. Thanks so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. This video, I want to talk about how you go about getting maximum ROI out of remote sales and business development reps in a B2B company. And it's got a couple of key components that I want to talk about here. The first being, which I've dug into in videos in the past, LPA, list, process, or which includes pitch, and then activity, right? That's the magic formula for reps to be successful. And then the second thing I want to talk about is how we hire. One of the things I've seen over the last 10 years, especially as of late, really missing the boat on how to hire sales and business development reps, right? It's something I know why owners and hiring managers and that think the way that they do. But you would think from the experience of it not working enough times that they would start to really change. And I see the same pattern over and over and over again. So I want to dig into that today a little bit. So the first part is, how do we get them to be, how do you get a max ROI out of reps, right? Well, the first thing is you've got to have the magic formula. You got to have LPA, right? We got to have a targeted list. We got to have a process that we're going to follow, right? And they need to be trained on your products and services, of course. And then you got to have activity. Right? And activity needs to be tracked. Okay. And I think that's a really important component in as far as formula goes for reps. So I'm just showing you a screen here. We build everything up for clients on Apollo. When I build lists, their Apollo account, usually, sometimes ours, giving you, looking at, this is a big list, by the way, this is for email predominantly. But looking at, targeting based on, obviously, industries, we're using keyword exclusion, right? We're targeting specific sizes of companies, and then we're targeting specific titles within those companies with certain excluded titles, right? So we want to make sure the list is targeted. What are we trying to make sure we have it from a company standpoint, size of the company, whether employee count or revenue, and then the titles of the people that we need to reach out to. Who do we need to be calling on, right? And I think that's really, really important in building a targeted list. Matters a lot, right? Having the right information for your rep for their cold outreach. Again, whether they're sales or business development, doing appointment setting, lead generation, and appointment setting for sales. Okay. So targeted list, very important. If you've not been on Apollo, I highly recommend it. Certainly, there's other players in the space. I think this is the best bang for your buck platform on the market in that space. Okay. Partially because you can connect, domains, email addresses, and do high volume email. And I train on that for clients and stuff like that. But Apollo is definitely a great resource. Okay. Second thing is you got to have P. You got to have a process with a pitch. Right. So this is a document in our knowledge base, the Ultimate Sales and Business Development Guide for B2B owners. And this is all about how we build a process, what we're trying to do in cold outreach in particular. Again, whether it's sales or business development reps. And, should they be going right for an appointment? Should they be gathering intel first, getting information in front of them, and then moving on to a follow-up call to try to move to an appointment? All depends on your company structure, who they are. Are they sales? Are they business development reps? What are they trying to achieve as an end goal? But you got to have a process and an end goal for the rep, right? Whether it's a one call process or a two call process. And maybe for sales, it might even be 3, right? As far as actual processes, you might have to make 10 calls to get those 3 in. But at the end of the day, when we look at that, you got to have a process for your rep to follow. It's got to be very defined. They've got to know what they're trying to achieve as far as the steps go. And then what are they going to say, right? So I'm not a big scripting guy, but I do believe in some basic structure for the cold outreach side with voicemail, and then obviously the basics of the front end of their pitch and what they are trying to do on those specific calls, right? So you got to have that, right? And then finally, we got to have activity, and activity partially is tracking, right? So when I work with clients and I tell them, hey, this is what we should be training, you should be training reps on as far as tracking goes. It's, whether you have a CRM, a formal regular CRM, we use Monday.com, for example, you can use Google Sheets if you want a free option, right? That's definitely viable. But at the end of the day, you want to train reps to track the number of dials they're making on a day-to-day basis. Little tick marks on a piece of paper, go old school, right? I don't care. Right? How many decision makers did they speak with? And then how many did they achieve their goal with? Whether it's generating a lead, getting an email out to them with information, and there's a follow-up call required, whatever it is, you got to move to the next step, right? So number of dials, number of decision makers that we've talked to, and then the number that we're interested in moving to the next step, whatever that step is, right? Whether we're sending an email with information and collateral and a call links, call scheduling link, we're trying to schedule a call, whatever it is, right? How many of those did we achieve positive results on? Okay, those numbers are very important because if we see dials and not reaching any, very low reach rate on decision makers, right? We're only reaching a handful a day. Then we got a voicemail and a targeting problem, right? We got to look at that. If we're reaching enough decision makers, right? Like we have a rep at in-house that for a client that phenomenal dial rate, phenomenal connection rate. She was talking to, 25 to 40 decision makers a day, 25 to 35, I should say. But not moving people to the next step in any way, shape, or form the way she should be. That's a problem on her pitch, on her training, and that kind of stuff, right? So we have to be able to have those numbers to examine what we need to do. Okay. So again, formula for reps to be successful in B2B. If they're going to do cold outreach, sales or business development, doesn't matter. We need a targeted list. We need a process with a good pitch. And then we've got to have activity. And activity means tracking, right? Now, if we don't have the dials, that's a totally different circumstance. Obviously, that means the rep's not even working, which at that point that you need to let them go immediately, right? Okay, and with remote. And that's part of the reason remote's so successful is because once you have all these pieces in place, including the tracking, it's completely transparent. They know if they're working, right? So they're either working or they're not. And they almost always will, because going into it, if they know you're going to do that, they're not going to not show up and work, right? Because otherwise they know they're going to get called out immediately and they can't waste that. That's a waste of time. Okay, so very important. Now, when it comes to hiring, remote hiring is the best thing in the world because you have such a massive talent pool. It gives you leverage as an employer. Whether you're going to hire a rep in the United States or in a lot of cases for our clients, also we recruit Latin America and remote reps in Latin America because of low base compensation. Those are going to be independent contractors. Now, they're not 1099s, obviously, because they're not U.S. citizens, right? But they are independent contractors. You're not putting them on your payroll. You can't, right? Unless you become the employer of record formally in that country, which only a handful of our biggest clients do that kind of thing, right? So you're dealing with them as independent contractors in Latin America or in the United States. You're almost always hiring. But either way, remote gives you massive leverage because the demand to work remote, to work from home is so high. It's insatiable from the candidate perspective. In the United States, we get 50, just in our general recruiting from remote sales and business development, we get 50 to 100 a day, right? We get another 50 from Latin America. And, because the demand is so high and the supply side is so high, again, supply and demand, very simple, the salaries have been coming down, even with fairly accomplished reps. Base compensation requirements have been actually coming down, even though cost of living is going up and there's more pressure on reps to make more money. Their actual requirement for compensation is going down because they're just not getting it. They're just having such a hard time finding positions. So you've got leverage. So you're getting great talent. You're finding extraordinary talent at a very low price tag. But then when it comes to hiring, and this is a client, for example, that does a great job from a hiring standpoint because they look at the person far more than they look at resume, right? For me, and this is where I think companies make big mistakes, they look for the perfect resume. And industry experience, especially in B2B sales hiring, is the thing that owners and hiring managers just can't let go of. And I don't totally understand it. I get it in general. But it seems like you'd think they would have learned their lesson by now with reps failing all the time. When I look at hiring a rep, right? And again, it depends on your industry a little bit. But industry experience is highly overrated, right? People think somebody's going to come with a book of business or something. If they were going to do that, they would never be going through a process to apply for a position. They would have contacts in the industry. They could have a job in a day, right? So if they have a book of business, they're not shopping out on the market, right, for a position. So that goes out the window. So now we look at industry experience and say, okay, well, do they really need industry experience? What can't you train them on? For example, we work with one of the print franchises, and one of their franchisees was just married to the idea that the rep had to have print sales experience, and it made absolutely no sense. And he So we're looking at all the wrong people, people that required too much base compensation, people that didn't really want to do cold outreach anymore because they felt like they made their bones, so to speak, by doing cold outreach for their career. And so they had this experience in the industry. They had some contacts, but at the end of the day, it was a failing point because they didn't want to dig in and bang the phone, right? They didn't want to do their cold outreach. And on the second hire round, I said, look, you have to understand, you got to find the right fit from a person standpoint and within their career progression and what they need in terms of compensation so that it's a fit for what you need. So in other words, a lot of times what I like to see is I like to see some cold calling experience in sales or business development with a rep. They're looking at their second or maybe third job in their career. To me, that's the golden hiring time period to find a career rep in a B2B organization. Right out of school is tricky. If you want to, some companies do a good job of actually finding kids right out of school, run them through an assessment, make sure they're a match and everything. But then they dial the phone and they figure out whether or not that's for them, right? Banging the phone 100 times a day is a tough gig. So we find out if it's a fit for them, right? But as a general rule for sales hiring, I think that's a risky proposition. Some companies know that going in. They put reps on 30-day contracts, try them out, that kind of thing. And they've got ways to do that with candidates from certain states where they can make them, an independent contractor, although run them through an outsourcing firm or something like that, right? Or a staffing agency. Nonetheless, point being, we want to find people that are a fit for your company, right? In the role. Are they ready to bang the phone 100 times a day or 50 times a day, whatever it takes? Are they prepared for the system, the process, and the tracking, right? Are they, what do they need in terms of base compensation? Where are they at in their lives? Right? Are they going to have all these extracurricular things that are going to make it hard for them to focus on their job working remotely? All of those things are things you can glean during the interview process, right? Now you find the right match based on a little bit, again, experience in sales, some success, dialing the phone, business development, again, maybe sales experience. But they don't have to have 20 years of industry sales experience or 10 years of industry sales experience. That makes no sense. It narrows your candidate pool so much. And once they have so much experience in your industry, I can attest to the fact from 10 plus years in this, that as they get older, they don't want to bang the phone anymore. Generally speaking, if they've done it already and they've built a book of business in something, right, they don't want to go back and do that again. Right? At a certain point in their careers. So you got to find them at the right time with the right energy and compensation and a little bit of the right experience, but not get so married to this industry experience concept because it's just not necessary. For example, the person that I talked about in print, is a franchisee of one of the major franchises. We do quite a bit of recruiting for their franchisees. And he finally got it, right? But he just narrowed his candidate pool initially so much to print sales experience, and all of these reps wanted 75 to 125,000 base to work remote, right? Because they had industry experience, and then they get married to that, and you pay all this salary, and then they don't move. They get some low hanging fruit. They maybe go back to some customers that they've had in the past, and they get one or two. Maybe you've got a few leads for them or customers that they can take on, and that's great. But they never want to prospect. They want to fiddle around on LinkedIn. They want to fiddle around on, manual email. That's not their job, right? Their job is bang the phone. You can automate email. I can automate LinkedIn outreach. So anyway, that's the thing is let's look at hiring the right person at the right time in their career, right compensation, a little bit of the right experience, right? And then making sure they're a fit for the role. Right? Really digging in and making them understand what the grind is going to be to do that cold outreach. Because in reality, a rep coming in, it should be something like 50 to 100 plus dials a day, right? And if they're not prepared for that, it's not worth bringing them in, right? So hopefully that helps you. Again, if you're looking to hire, you want some help, we've got all kinds of talent available at all times for remote. If you need us to find the candidate for you locally, no problem. We can do that. We've got a program dedicated to that. You need somebody local in-house. You need a territorial sales rep, whatever the case is, customer service. Reach out to us. Schedule a call in the upper right-hand corner of the website, kevinmdowney.com. Thanks for being here today, guys. Best of luck in business in 26, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.